and welcome to episode 39 of the Brewed Sages, Stormbound players with a head for the game. I am Freeloader, and with me, as always, is Sabaiku. Sabaiku, how's it going tonight?
Fantastic.
So we have some housekeeping to do right off the bat, folks. We have some good news, some bad news. I always like giving the bad news first. And the bad news is that we're going to be ending the meta report. Sabaiku, what gives?
Yeah, it's a shame. We had a lot of fun doing it when we put it together, but a couple of factors here have influenced us. Number one is we just aren't getting the kind of response from the community, the help putting it together that we had because it's been around for a little while. It's not new and exciting anymore. I get that, but also I think the real reason why we're not getting help anymore is because it's not really needed anymore. I think that all the factions are in a pretty good state of balance right now. You do kind of see all of them on ladder, and all of the archetypes are reasonably strong for their class. Even Winter Rush, I played in the Heroes League last season, and it worked out great.
Yeah, you were top 10 with it for quite a big chunk of the month, no?
For the beginning of the month, at least. Yeah, I didn't end there, but at least I got there. And, at this point, it's really kind of a lot more granular help that you need with the meta report in terms of card selection rather than which faction and archetype is strong.
Right.
And, we're just not really able to analyze on a card by card basis. We don't have the kind of data that's needed for that.
Yeah, in some ways, I think this is a positive reflection on Sheepyard, right? The game had arbitrage a year ago when we started the meta report. There were factions that had a very rock paper scissors sort of benefit in certain archetypes, and when the meta shifted to a positive mix for that particular deck, it was manna from heaven. You could fly through the ranks. And so there was benefit in us kind of reporting to everyone, hey, here's the mix of what you're going to run into. This mix makes this particular deck A really, really good right now, and deck B is really bad to play. Everything's in just a good balanced state right now. I think we should give Sheepyard a deserving tip of the hat to say they've done a really good job of getting everything more or less into a balance where that arbitrage doesn't exist. Play whatever you want. It's all good, but none of it is super oppressive in the meta.
Yeah, some might be a few percentage points higher, some might be a few percentage points lower, but in general, it's all pretty viable.
Right, and it's probably going to be more what you're good at playing is a bigger percentage bump than you trying to learn something new that you don't know how to play. Like, even if it's slightly better into the current meta, if you don't know how to play it, it's going to be worse for you. So it's just not useful anymore like it used to be. So let's sweep that under the rug and say, okay, meta report, it's done. We will find something new. Hopefully you guys will like it. But let's move on from there to some great news. We've had him on as a guest, and then we've now decided to ask, and no idea why he said yes, but Thomas the Train Petrie has decided to join us. We are extremely excited to have him as part of our team. Please welcome the newest member of the Brewed Sages, Thomas Petrie. Tom, how's it going tonight?
Doing pretty all right. How about yourself?
Doing pretty all right. All right.
Fantastic.
Well, so with that, we are in fact now the Brewed Sages, easily the second best Stormbound related podcast in production. As a reminder, you can always follow us at Brewed Sages on Twitter, or for all of you who act your age, not your shoe size, our email address is thebrewedsages@gmail.com. Okay, guys, let's jump into it. There's an 800-pound sheep in the room. Let's address it. How are you guys enjoying the game since the newest balance changes? I'll start with Thomas.
All right, so it's been a lot of fun. For the first few days straight, just Rogue Sheep jammed in every deck like I said I was going to do.
Yes.
And some decks it's worked better in, some decks it's been a lot worse, to say the least. And so overall, it's just been a lot of fun testing it, but then even more so, I then decided to try not testing it and play against opponents that don't have any whatsoever.
Ooh, okay. And Sabaiku, how about you?
I have also been playing Rogue Sheep nonstop. I upgraded it to 5 right before the season ended in order to get those sweet fusion stones back. and because I was just legitimately very excited to play it. I've been testing it exclusively in winter,
Okay.
just because that's what I was playing all last month. I wanted to keep playing it, so just trying different builds with various levels of speed and various levels of greed, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I will say the thing I enjoy most about it is every game does feel different. Like, I'm not playing Swarm, but I'm finishing my opponent off with Forgotten Souls. I'm not playing Ironclad, but I'm able to stop, just drop a 1 mana unstable build on my opponent's baseline to hold my front. It's pretty great.
I have also been testing it. I've tested it in 2 decks. The Winter Rush deck, mostly because Icicle Jev gives you a fantastic turn 5 where you then have additional mana to also play Sheep, which feels like a great turn. But I've also tried it in Shadowfen Rush, and I basically made like an all 4 and under kind of ish deck with Rogue Sheep is kind of my top end to just, if I run out of value, use Rogue Sheep to get it. And what I have found, Thomas, we'll come back to you with this, but what I have found has sort of strengthened my original thought that mid-range is what really wants Rogue Sheep in the long run. Like, everyone's trying it now. You can jam it into anything you want. But my experience has been when I'm playing a rush deck into a control deck and I get some super top heavy thing, even the 1 mana discount, like into an Armed Schemers, it's just like, I don't want to play it anyway. This doesn't help me. But my opponent hitting a whole bunch of my 2-drops that now cost 1 with their Rogue Sheep get a much bigger advantage playing against me and being able to play defense against me than I do into them.
That's fair. I think for the most part, I agree, and for sure that it doesn't fit into rush. It's just too inconsistent when you're trying to rush and you get whatever random wonky card from your opponent. So it's going to be, yeah, in mid range, and then like the heavy mid range decks seem to work with it, getting the low cost cards to be able to play and keep your opponent's front off a little bit. So I think that part is accurate for sure.
But Sabaiku, it does really work in this winter deck with the Icicle Jev turn, right?
It does, and I have tested it a lot with that combo, just because Icicle Burst in Shyvana helps to clear a unit off of the board, gives you the extra mana to play the sheep. More importantly, it gets the cards out of your hand so that you can get the full value of the sheep, especially if you have sheep at a high level. You're able to pull cards from your opponent's hand. It's still early on in the game, so they probably do have some low mana cards that you can get on the board right away. Either, their GP the turn that you play that, or the very next turn you can play a bunch of cheap stuff, and that helps you kind of recover the tempo you lose by playing Shyvana in the sheep, where they both don't move and they don't play defense.
All right, so are we prepared, and I'll ask this of both of you, are we prepared to declare winter as the main faction for using sheep?
Unfortunately, I think yes. I didn't want it to go there, but yes.
It's definitely just the most consistently able to use it, right? Like, I mean, look, the Rogue Sheep is very, very good, but it does have some downsides, right? I already talked about it doesn't move, so it can't play defense. It slows down your cycle, so you have to be able to make really good use of the resources in your hand or have mana gain in order to play additional stuff. You lose tempo by playing it, and Winter is really good at the mana gain and recovering lost tempo. Emptying your hand in order to play it, right? Again, like being able to accelerate your mana to dump other cards out of your hand to then refill it. It just works so well in Winter that's why I haven't really tried it in anything else.
All right, and I'll ask Thomas this first. Do you anticipate any major jump upwards or downwards in sheep usage once the bug of no spell copying is fixed?
Oh god, it's gonna go up so bad. I do think they will have to nerf it at that point. At the very least, sheep can't copy legendaries. If they do that, then everything will be fine and dandy. But if it can get Gift of the Wise, we're gonna be in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I gotta say, right now, I don't think it's overpowered at all. I think it's really well balanced, but that's with the current bug where it's not copying spells. And if it does start to copy gift, it's gonna change things.
I have to say, though, like just taking a 30,000 foot view of all of this, it has been one of the most refreshing weeks of playing Stormbound since you and I first got started, Sabaiku, because this has felt as close to the excited morning of Christmas, opening up the game and just trying out and seeing what you run into. So much experimentation. You don't know who's playing what. You don't know what to expect. This feels a lot, and I hate to keep going back to the same comparison, but it's the only other game that I've played that has any sort of similarities to Stormbound. This feels like the week right after a new expansion in Hearthstone. All the excitement, all the experimentation. It's been a lot of fun to play this week, has it not?
It has for me.
Not your opponents.
I plead the fifth. When I'm still optimizing, it's probably pretty good for them. Plus, you get crazy rogue sheep mirrors, and that's fun for everybody.
Yeah, Thomas, what's the most number of rogue sheep you've seen on a board at the same time, you think?
Somewhere between 8 and 10.
Oh, good lord.
When you can get 0 mana rogue sheeps and you just put the entire board down, it's pretty nutty.
So that begs a question: have we figured out yet what the strategy is? Do either of you think once you identify that it is a rogue sheep mirror? Is it better to, if you can't play Rogue Sheep, is it better to cycle it out of your hand so your opponent can't copy it? Or is it better to wait for your opponent and accept that he's going to copy your Rogue Sheep, but then play yours right afterwards with the hope of getting a discounted Rogue Sheep?
That's exactly what you want to do, or at least what I've been trying to do is get my hand to be as low cost mana cards as possible, and then when they play the Rogue Sheep, if they get a copy of my sheep, then I dump my hand with the increased chance that I'm going to get their Rogue Sheep, and then if I can't play that 2 mana Rogue Sheep, I'm just going to throw it away so that they don't have the ability to get it back anytime or get a copy of mine anytime soon.
Interesting. Sabaiku, have you started putting any sort of tactics into the Rogue Sheep mirror?
Oh yeah, I've been thinking about it and testing different strategies, and none of them really consistently work because the games get real nutty. Yeah, a lot of it really depends on whether or not they copy your sheep, and if you are willing to give them the chance to copy it, then you're kind of relying on them not cycling it back into their deck so that you can copy it again. It's it is tough. My comfort level basically gets to, if it's 2 mana, I'm okay leaving it in their hand because it's going to be harder for them to play multiple copies. If it's going to be 1 mana in their hand, get rid of it. And do not let them get a 1 mana sheep. They're just going to fill up the board on you.
Yeah, I have actually found in so again going back to that Shadowfen deck that I was testing. It only has 2 1-mana cards in it, right? It's got Summon Militia, it's got Green Prototypes, and if I go first and I have one of those 2 and I play it, and then I hit Rogue Sheep on 4, I have chosen to cycle it away because the odds of me finding the other 1-drop to be able to play 1-drop into Rogue Sheep on 5 seems too low, if I'm paying attention to my cycle. So I've just thrown it out of my hand to prevent my opponent from, because they're going to get to go on their 5-mana turn first. I don't want to let them do it.
Yeah, but that's okay, because for you, in a rush deck, the Rogue Sheep is something you're playing on 7 or 8 mana. You play a couple cards, right? You play Green Proto's Gifted Recruits and then Rogue Sheep, and you get 3 cards from your opponent. They're all discounted. You can't really do a ton with it this turn because you've already used up all of your mana, but that's okay. It's going to give you a strong turn next turn that hopefully lets you overwhelm them and close out the game.
I will say the funny thing about Rogue Sheep right now is that it's doing a whole lot to equalize levels in matches.
Yeah, it is kind of funny, especially if you get something at level 5 that you don't have at level 5, or if you're used to it at level 5, right? You pull your opponent's, say witches, and it doesn't work the way that you think it's going to because you're not paying attention to the levels. It adds a little complexity.
It does. I'm really enjoying it. Parting thoughts before we move on. The whole reason why we chose to put together episode 39 as early in the season as we did was because of how much the meta has shifted since prior to the Rogue Sheep update. So with that in mind, are there any thoughts, any tactics, any sort of high level, if you're going to build a deck around it, here's what you should be doing. If you're going to play a deck with it, here's what you should be trying to do. Can we help our listeners out with any either strategies or tactics on using Rogue Sheep. Sabaiku, let's start with you.
Yeah, I will say I agree with you that I do think it belongs in a slower deck. Icicle Burst and Giovanna is a nice combo. It's not a necessary combo. Mers is nice because it gives you a 0 mana token, just kind of something to help the sheep turn, right? The downsides are real. You do have to play around them. You have to try to dump cards from your hand. You do have to try to have other ways to play defense in your deck. But if you can make that work, you get a really good payoff for it. I don't think it's particularly strong. It's a 1 or 2 mana 7 strength essentially at level 5, depending on how many cards you pull from it. It's reasonable. It allows you to do a lot on your next turn is kind of what it is. It's like Frozen Core. You're playing something that doesn't move now for a mana discount on a future turn, and that's really great if it pays off well. The payoff for this is a lot more random because you're really relying on what your opponent has, and it can give you something really great. It can give you a Forgotten Souls. It can give you some garbage, like you said, Arm Schemers that you can't really make use of. But that at least makes every game feel different. It gives a little variety, which I think that the game really needs to make it more and more replayable.
All right, and Thomas, I did queue into an opponent who was running an Aaron Bladestorm Needle Blast deck, and let me tell you how frustrating it was pulling nothing but a 1 mana discounted Aaron.
Oh, I'm sure that was the greatest play that you ever made.
I cycled it into my deck and then copied another one a few turns later and realized, oh my gosh, my deck is just filling up with Aarons and no spells.
Nice. So, question is, who won?
Oh, I did not. No, I'm not winning.
Well, there we got it. If people are irritated with Rogue Sheep, then just play Aaron.
Yeah, just play a spell deck. All right, any other thoughts?
So the only thing I really have, I don't have any deck building tips or anything like that yet, just because there is so much potential with it and so much to explore yet. But the only thing that I have for a pro tip really is you people that are playing sheep and you're getting a green prototypes and you don't have like a use for it, you just have a 0 mana prototypes, please quit throwing it out there. All you're doing is essentially turning your opponent's gifted or green prototypes, you're throwing it out there, and they've obviously got it in their hand too, so they're just going to be able to make that trade and give the 5 strength to something else. So you're essentially turning your free spell into them or their green prototypes into a gifted recruits.
That's a really good point. Yeah, they now have a
Yep.
1 mana they have a 1 mana pog effectively.
Exactly, yeah, and yeah, people they get that green prototypes and they just throw it out there. They yeah, if you've got a specific use for it, if you need to reset their front, or if you need to do an even trade, or whatever other those actual legitimate reasons, do those. Do not just throw it out just to throw it out, because you're turning their 1 mana spell into a potion of growth.
But it's free.
But it's not.
There's a cost, yes.
we won't mention any streamers, but also if you get something like, I don't know, Cordia and Siege Breakers, maybe don't play the Siege Breakers, because you happen to know there's a really good use for that Siege Breakers if you wait a turn.
I will say that is definitely an underrated part. Just knowing what is in your opponent's hand, you can see how to play around the cards that they have. And if you can kind of keep track of that, that really helps.
You also know exactly when to concede, especially if you play a sheep and you steal a siren and you're on 9 mana and your opponent has you at 12 life. It's like, oh, whoops.
Yeah, I can't clear his front, so I might as well just push the button now.
Yup.
All right. Well, I think with that, then we're going to move along from our main topic. And again, tip of the hat to Sheepyard. This has been, I think, one of the most exciting first weeks of a month in recent memory, at least, possibly in the entirety of the time that I've been playing the game. And we want to bring in our news segment. Our news segment is going to be called Deck Detective. Sabaiku, what is Deck Detective?
All right, so the intent here is we're going to take a high-end deck, probably found from the Discord in the high-end decks channel, great place to go for resources. We're going to just dig into it. We're going to talk about what it does. We're going to talk about which cards have to be in there, which cards are tech cards, what are alternatives you can put in there. Just kind of dive into what the purpose of each card is. We talked earlier about how the meta report wasn't particularly useful anymore because it was too high level. This is our way of going a little bit more granular and breaking down the individual card level.
Yeah, and this is going to usually be something exceedingly recent within the last couple of weeks. We're trying to make these decks something that is currently either achieving number one or achieving sort of top 10 or really good success currently. So if you're looking for a new deck to switch to, we're trying to provide for you an option. And part of our analysis, as Subaiku said, will be to try to help you, those of you who don't have complete libraries, figure out kind of, where can I find other options for cards, or we'll also point out if you don't have this card leveled up, just don't bother with this deck. There will definitely be some of those. Like if you have me at level 2, maybe this tower deck isn't for you, kind of a thing. All right, so Thomas, can you give us our first ever deck detective deck?
Absolutely. So this one was actually provided to us by, or not necessarily provided, we kind of just stole it from the
Yep,
Discord. So,
100.
so this one was posted by Stony J25, and it's the deck that he's been using to hit number one in Heroes League for sure 2 months. I think possibly though 3 months in a row now though. So he's absolutely crushing it. And should I just run on through the cards?
You can, or I can. Whoever
All
wants to
right.
take it is fine.
Well, I didn't know if you just wanted to go through one by one or the entire thing, but
Well, yeah,
so
we'll give the list first, and then we'll pick it out. I'll give the list. Let's do that.
okay.
So, starting from the lowest mana up to the highest, we go green prototypes, dubious hags, gifted recruits, rain of frogs, wild saberpaws, hunter's vengeance, toad, the elevated witches of the west, Loris, Ubis, broodmother Cordia, and then finally high priestess Claxi. Oof, this has a lot of legs in it, guys.
Yep.
It is solid.
Very heavy, very high cost deck. Obviously, a Shadowfen deck, heavy mid range / control. Like, this deck really wants to just grind you down. There's no runners in there other than Saberpaws. Upus will do a
That's a
little
good
bit of
point.
chip damage, but this is a deck that really just wants to control the board and make an overwhelming board that you can't remove.
Oof, I
And
hadn't even realized that.
absolutely will do that. I played with it a few times after he posted it, and yes, it's just going to just make your opponent lose all faith.
Now,
It's
I have a
brutal.
question for you, Thomas. When you were playing this deck, did you have any match that lasted fewer than 25 minutes?
I don't think so.
So just looking statistically at this is 6 cards from Shadowfen. 6 cards are neutral, but it's also 5 legendaries and 7 non-legendaries. Of the 7 non-legendaries, 2 are spells. That's Rain of Frogs and Hunter's Vengeance. Interesting, Hunter's Vengeance rather than Toxac. That's the first sort of why not card that I see when I'm looking at this. Thomas, Subaiku, do either of you have a good reason as to why you would rather Hunter's Vengeance over Toxac?
Yes, so when I was playing it, there was a few times where you just kind of get overran in the early game because again, we're in Heroes League and you need the low mana cost cards, and half this deck is you can't play it on your first turn, and so if
Mm-hmm.
you're going first, you might just have to pass turn, and opponents can get across the board very quickly, and so you really need to be able to reset their front fairly quickly and start making your progress so that by turn 4 or 5 mana turn, you're going to be able to start getting value out of some of the big legendaries that are going to then start being able to come out. So that's really what's going on. Is it's kind of like your lifeline in the early game.
Right. So you're playing it when you don't have board presence. Toxic Sacrifice requires that board presence in order work.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
100%.
Sabaiku, I don't see there's a 6 mana legendary that I'm thinking kind of belongs in a Shadowfen deck with Rain of Frogs. And I see Claxi at 8 mana. What happened? What happened to the other one?
My guess is that he is running Claxi specifically to counter Bragda deck. So his own Bragda would be counterproductive there, right? You want to let your opponent make a board where Bragda sets everything to the same strength, and then Claxi just comes down and turns those all into your own ravens instead.
Oh dear. So Claxi is the mirror tech.
That's
So,
my guess, yeah.
yeah, that's a good theory. It is possible. The other possibility is when I was running this deck, because Bragda got so rampant for a while, people learned how to play around it. When I was playing this, I was thinking quite a few times if I should swatch out Calaxy for Bragda,
Mm-hmm.
but there was so few turns where I could profitably play Bragda because people really are learning how to play around it and not give you those value plays. And so I actually 100% understand the reason why in this meta that Calaxy is the right call because of that. The opponent's just getting smart.
Now, how did your opponents play around Bragda? Did they not leave you small things to trade into? Did they tuck small units where you couldn't access them?
Exactly, both of those.
Okay. Okay.
And
Okay.
then at 6 instead, Stony J is running Broodmother Cordia, which is just a nice proactive card, right? Bragda needs setup. Cordia can just come down offensively, defensively. Do you have front? Do you not have front? It doesn't matter. You can just put it wherever on the board at any time you have 6 mana to spare.
Yeah, I've always liked Cordia. It is a lot of AoE resistant, not all AoE resistant. For instance, Hunter's Vengeance doesn't impact it. Toxic Sack doesn't impact it. Unfortunately, I did find out that Aaron into Rain destroys it. And for some reason, the month I really jammed Broodmother in my
So you mean
Shadowfen Rush
Aaron
deck.
into Bladestorm?
Yeah, Bladestorm, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, unfortunately.
it was
Those
just
those eggs are fragile.
they sure are. Um, Ubis. We have a construct. We have some ravens. We have knights. We have toads and felines. That's a good amount. Oh, and we have dragons with Cordia. That's 6 different archetypes. That feels like it's a good deck for Ubis. Seeing Ubis and Hunter's Vengeance though in the same deck seems a little surprising. Any thoughts
Uh,
on Ubis?
Again, Ubis is just a proactive card. You can kind of just drop it down. If you only get one ping out of it, it's fine. If you get 4 pings out of it, that's good. It's just something that you can play when you have 5 mana and you're not stuck with an empty board. It just works all the time.
Yeah, I was definitely finding actually that Ubis was the win con for this deck, because you're just grinding so much value out of the board. Some of the best plays were Hunter's Vengeance to clear your opponent's stuff, play prototypes and hags, and then Ubis and just keep pinging them for 6. And it doesn't take a whole lot of pings to be able to win.
So Ubis is not a card then that you would think we can swap out for like Flameless Lizard.
Nope, that one is definitely a critical piece of the deck for sure.
Yeah, let's look at that. That's a good point. Let's look at the neutral cards in the deck, right? Green prototypes, Gifted Recruits, Wild Saber Paws, Hunter's Vengeance, Loris, Ubis. So half the deck are neutral card,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all just kind of generally useful neutral cards.
Oh yes, they are definitely all guns.
You could put them in pretty much any deck at any speed, and they'd all be pretty fine. And in here, I think they really, especially Loris, work to shore up the weaknesses of Shadowfen.
Yep, absolutely. When people start playing in lines because they don't want you to get value out of your witches, then you throw out Loris to throw them off.
Yeah, one forces you to play into the other. It's a nasty 1-2 combination.
It absolutely is.
So I think maybe Loris is the one that stands out as something you could get rid of if you didn't have it at a high level, and maybe play Void Surgers instead. Maybe even Toxic Sacrifice, right? Really rely on the Saber Paws or Rain to let you position a unit that you can then blow up and destroy your opponent's front. But
I
nothing else works quite the same.
I think that's okay though. I will say one weird thing about Broodmother Cordia that I found as a bizarre edge case, but actually worked out really well. If you really want your eggs to live, and there's a way in which you can push their front back with Broodmother into Toxsacking Broodmother. It works out great because your eggs don't get damaged by the Toxac. So if it works out where Broodmother can trade into something, survive the trade, even at 1 or 2 health, and then you Toxac it. It if you can clear the front like that, and now suddenly your opponent has to come all the way back down to try to pop your eggs, that is an effective thing. I like Toxac. I don't necessarily think it has to be in the deck, but I feel like it would be a good inclusion if you had to take something out.
Yeah, but to the point that Thomas made earlier, you don't want to take out Hunter's Vengeance for it because you are going to get behind on board early. So that's really a critical card. All of the 3 and belows, right? That half of the deck, you really can't change a thing there. Maybe you could take out Wild Saber Paws for a Lawless Herd or something like that. Big Thrust Tigers.
Big Thrust Tigers was my other thought.
It's got to be something cheap in order to just help you cycle through your deck and get units on the board. And then on the high end, Toad, Witches, and Loris are all your defensive cards. And you could take those out, but man, you need to make sure that whatever you put in is equally defensive.
Right, exactly. So I liked the thought of Void Surgers for Loris. Void Surgers isn't going to generate as much value as Loris will. Just can't. It's very difficult to get a board set up correctly for it. But it's not terrible as a replacement. It's certainly less expensive than the Legendary. I don't feel like Toad is a good value generator, right? Like you get a good trade off it, especially when you have hags in your deck. But I don't think of it as much as a defensive tool as it is just something that's growing on the board and generating value for you.
Well, it's defensive because it takes a 2-for-1 there.
Possibly.
Right? It kills something, it buffs itself, and jumps in front of another unit to kill that too.
No, that's fair. I don't know, Thomas, do you see a card here that you're like, well, if you needed to, you could swap this out for something less expensive?
I'd say probably Claxy or Broodmother. Probably not both, just one or the other, but I'm not entirely sure what the answer is when you swap one of those out. Everything else feels very...
That's a good point. Stoney was playing this at a time when Sheep was not serving the same function that it does now, so you could probably jam it in there.
Nope. At least I don't think so. Someone else might be able to make it work, but I think I took one of them out because, like I said, in every single deck in my library, I swapped out one card for Sheep. I don't remember what it was in this one. I want to say it was Galaxy, and I was like, meh.
No,
so.
I think it would be Broodmother. If I was going to do it, I would do Broodmother. Galaxy feels too important in terms of both the mirror, but also getting real late game value out of Rain of Frogs. If you're playing a deck with Rain of Frogs and you don't have Butchers, then Rain of Frogs becomes much less impactful later in the game.
That is true.
So you either need Bragda, you need Claxy, or you need Butchers.
Yeah, so go ahead. Sorry.
So we have Rain. I don't want to get rid of Rain. We keep Priestess. I would say Broodmother goes out for Sheep if you wanted to try it.
Yeah, that's reasonable. I look at Claxy and Cordia as basically the 2 value generators that clog up the board and help you win. And basically anything that creates a decent sized board would work in those spots. If you wanted to take out Claxy for Bragda, like we talked about, that's pretty reasonable. If you wanted to take out Cordia for Bragda, that's reasonable. Just anything that creates value for you would work.
Yeah. The one thing I worry about with Sheep in this deck is there's just you really only have like a 50-50 chance of hitting a card with Sheep that you can play to empty out your hand. Like on turn 7, what are the odds you can actually get rid of 3 cards, Sheep included?
Yeah, this deck is designed to go late, though. You do not need to play it on 7. You could play it on 13 mana, 14 mana.
Well, that's when you need to do it.
Yeah, I look at Toad and maybe think, if I needed to replace that with something, Toad or Witches could both be Edric, again, as something that's kind of generally useful, neutral.
Okay.
Toad or Witches could be Siege Breakers. If you're seeing a lot of structures, then maybe you want the Siege Breakers in there. Witches I find don't get a ton of value a lot of the time anyway, because to your point about Bragda, Thomas, people play around Witches when they play against Shadowfen.
All right. So in general, then, to our listeners, we think that if you have a lot of legendaries, this is a fun deck to try out. But you really do need Ubis for a win con with this. You can get away without maybe one or two of the others, maybe like one of the defensive and one of the value generating each, but definitely not both of the value generating or both of the defensive. And then, there are some other cheap. I mean, the one great thing about Shadowfen is there are great cheap common or rare at the most cards that can slide into kind of any deck. I'm thinking things like Heliotroopers.
Yeah, that's a really good point. If you wanted to get rid of Toad and just put in Heliotroopers, it's probably still going to work okay. It's not going to provide the same amount of value, but if your Heliotroopers is high level and you can win some trades with it, it's a pretty reasonable card.
Yeah.
Right? In general, the goal of this deck is to just stall to the late game, clog up the board, and create overwhelming value. The defensive tools that are in there are probably the best for that purpose, but you can put in some other stuff that would work just fine.
All right, and with that, I know this is going to come as a shock to our listeners, but we actually have a card of the week this week, back by popular demand. It's been a while. Thomas, would you like to give us our card of the week?
Harpies of the Hunt. So continuing on with the Shadowfen conversation, common, mana cost 3, and has some great stats for the mana cost. Even at level 1, it goes from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to the top. And the reason this thing is so fantastic across the entire board is, again, at that level 1, for all the new players out there, 4 power for 3 mana is not a bad play whatsoever. But then, by the time it gets up to 8 mana, it's a amazing blocker for scrapped planners.
Yeah, this is actually part of the reason why I wanted to include this as our card of the week when we originally selected it and then ran out of time for 3 episodes. I had never thought of including this in a deck, and then 1C posted a Shadowfen deck in the Discord that included it, and I reached out to him and I'm like, "What? This card is unplayable. I've never used it in a deck. Why is this here?" And he said, "Oh, well, it's normally unplayable, but right now there's so much scrap planners out there." It was during like Ironclad's reign, and Sabaiku, it blew my mind that this card has just been sitting there this entire time for months of Ironclad's reign, and never once did I look at it and think,
It's a nice
clean
tech
trade.
card. It's a nice tech card in a specific matchup. It is basically a Fort of Ebonrock, right? 3 mana, 8 strength at level 5. But different from the Fort of Ebonrock, like you can just play this on your baseline to open the game and it will move your front for you. It's not going to just sit there. Now, the downside is, we've been talking about witches and toxic sacrifice. Like those work against it as a unit, whereas they wouldn't against Fort of Ebonrock. So it's kind of pros and cons for playing it.
Mm-hmm. But and I do want to point this out, like a lot of times we see a 1 mana ding, or pardon me, a 1 health ding at the same mana for movement. This is actually 2 bigger, is it not, than a Westwind Sailors?
It is, yes. You are definitely getting a reward for playing something with no movement.
Oof, that's a big boy for 3 mana. That's pretty solid. I would think right away, Thomas, that this is basically just mindless hordes in green, is it not?
Essentially, yes, which is also a decent card. Back in April, when the Zuri Dark Harvest deck really just took over the meta, I was actually testing out Mindless Horde for a little bit because that was also, again, during Ironcalad's reign. Unfortunately, since it never had movement in that deck, that's when I found Big Thrust Tigers to be the better card in that deck. But Mindless Horde was definitely a contender in the deck.
And you do still see people run Mindless Horde sometimes. I'm thinking specifically of MKM. I know I've seen him run it in decks with Queen of Herds, but there you have the synergy where you're trying specifically to pull satyrs out of your deck. You have Queen, you have Moonlit Airy. Shadowfen doesn't have anything that works with Ravens in the same way. It's just a pile of stats.
That's a really good point. There isn't any Raven synergy. Are there any other for lack of a better term, I guess they are races, right? Are there any other races that lack synergy in the game, or is it just Ravens who got left out in the cold?
Dwarves, Frostlings have freeze.
Frostlings do freeze, but not preferentially interaction with other other frostlings, right?
Well, yeah,
Like frostlings do a specific thing a lot of the time, but they don't necessarily work together in the same way that satyrs have things that work only on satyrs. Constructs, right? Like link
true.
golems only works on construct, for
Right,
example.
exactly.
Good
But
Or
point.
like toads,
upgrade portal, right?
yeah, yeah. But toads, for example, like butchers doesn't have to pull from the toads from random frogs. It's just the most convenient way to make a lot of one strength units for butchers.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I think just constructs and satyrs are the only ones I can think of that
That get that kind of synergistic connection.
Yep, you're right.
How
Interesting.
about that? Not something I had thought about before.
But that's why this is different from Mindless Horde, right? Like it's kind of less worth running because you don't have that synergy.
Well, right. So that was kind of the next question I had was, so at 3 mana I can get 8. But at 5 mana I can get a Flameless Lizard, which is huge.
Oh yeah, dragons have synergy in the same way.
Synergy though, right? Right. So that's the thing is as a pile of stats at 3 mana, it's pretty good. But at 5 mana, Flameless Lizards is not just a pile of stats. It's a pile of stats with ridiculous amounts of synergy, especially in Shadowfen now with Sunbeam, right? Thinking to Arthas's Chonk Beam, for example, as a deck that takes that synergy and exploits it. Is it better? Like, is there a sweet spot for where you want your pile of stats? For some reason, thinking through most of the decks that I play my pile of stats to tank my front line and hold it at 5. Usually it's Ubis, but it can also be Flameless Lizard. 3 is not the mana that I choose for that. What do you guys think?
4 or 5 mana. I'm really liking my 4 mana cards.
There's so many good 4 mana cards.
There really are.
The difference between this and Flameless, though, is that Flameless is a better strength to mana ratio.
Ooh, that's a good point as well.
For 2 more mana, you get double the strength, and it's still like relatively cheap, right? It's not like you're spending 7 or 8 on something. It's 5. It's gonna tank your front line or play defense for you in a way that nothing else for that mana cost can. Your opponent just has no way to deal with it on 5 or 6 mana unless they have confinement, which is not something you see widespread right now.
Right. I normally ignore confine when I take a look at like a tank card, and I don't normally use towers for it. I don't know why, but I don't. When I look at the unit that I want to use for my tank to hold my front line, I usually think about it in terms of how many cards my opponent has to put into it to clear it, ignoring confinement. And this is not 1. This is definitely 2 cards, right? Is there anything out there that can, for the same mana, clear an 8? No, there's nothing.
Yeah, there is. In winter, the 3 mana dragon. That name escapes me for a second.
Yowling Weavers.
Yes.
Yowling Weaver.
Yep.
Okay, so there is 1 card out there that can do it. But
At a high cost.
At a high cost.
At a high cost, yeah.
Right, sure. Flameless is, you can't get away. There's no way you could do it with 2, right? Flameless needs 3 cards. Basically, your entire opponent's next turn would have to be dumped into Flameless to empty it, right?
Yep. Yeah. So 2 notes. Number 1, the reason why you don't use towers to hold your front line is because the only really good tower for that is Unstable Build. And the reason why Unstable Build is the only one that's good for that is because it does not get destroyed by a max level Siege Breakers.
Oh, good point.
Right?
Good
Siege Breakers is still pretty prevalent as a tech card, not as much as it used to be a few months ago, but you still see it pretty regularly. So you can't really rely on like a Fort of Evanrock to hold your front anymore.
That's true. And what's the second thing? You said there were 2 things.
The second thing is really, we're talking about Flameless Lizards now. This card's been out for like 6 months, but people are really just starting to level it up and experiment with it in the past couple months, other than, like early on with Arthas and the Chunk Beam. Right? Now it's starting to see widespread play. People finally start to get enough copies of it.
I'm so glad you brought this up. Do you ever, as an aside, did you ever watch Seinfeld episodes?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that made Seinfeld so great, and I will stop this aside very quickly, I promise, was that they would often start with a joke and then the show would move on and then it would circle back to that original joke at the end. Like it opened and ended with the same concept, right? You just brought us all the way back to how great it feels to have a big, impactful change to the meta this month.
So what's different about Rogue Sheep versus Flameless Lizards?
It's been in the game for a year. And whether or not you wanted to, you've been collecting copies of it this entire time. Maybe you haven't been playing with it because it wasn't really a playable card unless you were maining Control Pirates until now. And then suddenly all those copies you had are relevant. And from a year, the economy of this game is such that it takes a long time before you accumulate enough copies to really make a card impactful. And so even if it is a phenomenal card like Flameless Lizards is a great card, but it takes a while to accumulate enough copies for it to be relevant at your levels. Rogue Sheep's been out for a year. They make a change to it that makes it impactful, and boom, look at what happens. The game becomes completely new overnight. I wish this was possible with more cards.
I agree. It's really a function of the resource generation in the game and the cost to level up the cards, right? We just did our 6-month review about a month ago now, and we said, yeah, it's great that Shipyard has taken steps to improve resource generation, but the fact is you still need a lot of resources in order to level up your collection, and you can't really just spend it all on new cards that come out because you've got all the old cards you're still trying to level up at the same time.
Well, unless you're a whale like Thomas. Thomas, how long did it take you to get your Rogue Sheep to level 5? Did you already have it?
I had it already. I've had it for probably almost like 6 months. I don't even know what happened. It was just like one day it was like, oh, that's random. Got that one to level 5. There was a lot of ones that I didn't even have at level 5, and that one wasn't. I was like, that's great.
It's
yeah,
true.
But now it is, isn't it?
My Loris is still level 3. I had Rogue Sheep in level 4 with a handful of spare copies, even though it came out only a year ago, right? Maybe that was a little Sheepyard promotion, just kind of up the weight on Rogue Sheep, make sure everybody draws a little extra copies.
Are we going tinfoil hat now?
Oh yeah, we are.
The drop rate for Sheepyard was higher.
For sure, we demand to know, were you trying to force people to play Rogue Sheep?
So, the card of the week of the Harpies the Hunt ended up being 3 cards of the week, which is ironically the amount that you guys have missed, right? Because we've gone over Harpies and now Flameless and now Sheep again.
Boom, here you go. We've analyzed all of them. This is where it was going to go anyway. That's going to end the main portion of this episode, which means it's time for me to remind you to contact us, preferably in our channel on the Stormbound Discord server. You can always use Twitter at Brewed Sages. You can email us at thebrewedsages@gmail.com. We also have an additional way for you to reach out and support us. We have a Gumroad account where you can become patrons of our work, although we use work very, very loosely. Check out the link on our Stormbound Kitty page. This week, we've heard from one of our listeners. It was Ubermensch. He guessed correctly, quote, Thomas, the third toad of the gang, I'm down for it. Also, according to Thomas's theory, the temples start coming and they don't stop coming. Well, okay. Temple of Life is for silver and below. Gold has lots of farmers, so it'll be totally worthless. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. For Sabaiku and Thomas, I am Freeloader. We are the Brewed Sages, reminding you to stay hydrated.